Imagine turning 11. Most kids are excited about parties, presents, and getting closer to being a teenager. But for Bryan Jung, the lead up to his 11th birthday was anything but typical. When Bryan was 9, his father, a well-known lawyer in the Korean community, was shot by another lawyer. His father then spent the next 15 months in the hospital and care facilities and died just 9 days before Bryan's 11th birthday. As a child and teenager, Bryan witnessed his mother's incredible strength as she worked to hold their family together and help him navigate the intense anxiety that accompanied his grief. As an adult, Bryan had the opportunity to volunteer at Camp Erin, a camp dedicated to supporting children and teens who are grieving. This experience revealed the profound power of community and being able to openly express grief. Today, Bryan is the founder of This Is Why, an online community for individuals who experience the loss of a parent during childhood or adolescence. In this episode, Bryan shares his deeply personal story, what it was like to grieve in the public eye, how he learned to manage his anxiety, and the meaningful ways he continues to honor and carry his father's legacy forward. Bryan, welcome to Grief Out Loud. I'm looking forward to our time together today.
Jana, thanks so much for having me. Excited to meet you and finally get to chat a little bit.
I know we're going to talk a bit about your organization that you started, This Is Why, but let's talk about the why of This Is Why, which is your dad, who died when you were just about to turn 11. So tell us a little bit about your father.
Yeah, from what I can remember, he was just an incredible dad to be around. He was so supportive of my older brother and I, who's 3 years older. And, it really just got us to have that childhood that every child should have in terms of just having fun. My brother and I were really big into sports, so he would always, help coach these teams when we were younger and take us to games and things like that. And not only, in the sports aspect, but just in the family aspect as well. He was always such a great, father figure to have. It was such a special time with him for the 9 years, roughly that I had with him. But, things took a turn, but that's just kind of what makes our family so much closer today. So it's kind of living through those experiences and really providing a tribute to my dad, just living how I am today.
And Bryan, with having such a limited time with your father before he died, are there things you've learned about him since his death from friends or family members or other people in the community?
Over the years, I've just seen the outpouring of love that he really had and the respect that he had. He was a Korean American lawyer in the Seattle area. And, he was always busy working a lot. But, when he passed, we just had so many family friends who were, offering support and just a lot of kind of, media coverage around the area just in terms of the tribute to him and his work in the community. And I didn't really know the extent of that because I was so young, but just being able to read that and kind of speak with my family about that over the years has been so special and just really kind of cements, how important he was not only to our family, but also the community that he was working in around the Seattle area as well.
It's interesting to think that because of your dad's work, which gained him quite a bit of notoriety in the community, but then also his death, which was such a public event, a lot of coverage, that you've been able to go back and read things that were written about him versus having to just rely on other people's stories. And I hadn't thought about that, to have this sort of tangible opportunity to see the impact that he had on your community too.
Yeah, it truly was amazing. And I know my mother went to a couple different ceremonies and things like that in terms of different law associations my father was working with. And, she received some awards on my father's behalf and things like that that are always around our family home, which is so special to see because it really shows the impact that my father had that maybe I wasn't aware of just being so young and knowing that my dad was a lawyer, but not really knowing the specifics of what he was doing. And just to kind of see that love from the community is such a blessing. And hopefully his work and, just his impact, lives on forever.
You were 9 when your father was shot, and then he lived for another 15 months and he died just before you turned 11. And I know you were really young. What do you recall about the day that he was shot?
Yeah, it was honestly, just such a traumatic experience in certain parts, I remember so vividly what I was doing, how that day kind of progressed, which is very interesting because I feel like over the years, being so far away, close to, 20 years ago, there are some things I definitely can't recall as well, but there are some things that are just very, very ingrained in my mind. And, just to kind of provide a quick summary of that day, it felt like a normal day. Dad dropped me off at school, in our carpool and just went to school, came home in the carpool and started playing my video games. I noticed my mother wasn't home, and that wasn't really too uncommon. She'd maybe be running errands or things like that. But what she did was she had her sister, my aunt, come to ring the doorbell, which I was kind of shocked about because my aunt typically didn't come unannounced to the house. And she just told me that she just needs to pick me up. We need to go pick up my older brother from middle school. And we just need to go to my aunt's house where my mom will meet us at some point because something happened to dad. Obviously, that got a lot of thoughts in my mind. What does this mean? I was just so confused, didn't really know what was going on. And so we were just hanging out at my aunt's house. I was playing some more video games, just trying to pass the time, not really sure, what to do. And my mother came to my aunt's house just in tears, and she was speaking with my aunt and my uncle, trying to fill them in about what happened. I think she just came back from the hospital, potentially talking to police, things like that. So she was already in that fight or flight mode herself. But at some point, she sat my brother and I down, told us that dad had been shot, and he's in the ICU, and they're still trying to figure things out. And so that was just a complete, just absolute shock. The least thing you would expect from just a typical day, and everything was going smooth. And dad even dropped me off at school that morning. So processing really wasn't there in terms of, what am I feeling right now? What do I think of this news? But the whole evening and kind of the rest of that time just kind of marinate in that news and think about, what's going on. My cousins as well as my aunt, my uncle. It was really just trying to keep us in as best spirits as possible, which was incredibly difficult, especially I know my mom was obviously dealing with so much right then and there. It was just a night where we were trying to play some games, relieve any of this anxiety or unsure feelings. And, went to school the next day. My mother told my brother and I, you don't have to go to school, but if you want to, you can. I ended up going. And it was just a very odd day, I would say, just because they made an announcement over the school intercom, which I wasn't expecting. And that kind of just brought up a lot of things where, I was hoping it would be a little more private, but I guess the news did get out a little bit. And, just that the whole day and kind of those days in between, obviously were very tough to manage, but some of those moments are things I'll never forget just because of the impact that they had so early on.
Yeah, it's always interesting to look back on those moments or those times when you get news of a tragedy, what sticks with you and then what turns into just like the haze. You mentioned that when you first heard like something happened to your dad, but we're going to go to my house and then wait for your mom and she'll tell you more later, that it had already sparked some thoughts. Do you remember what you were trying to play out of like what could have happened before you heard what actually happened?
I think what my aunt said in the beginning was that he was just sick and that he was just in the hospital. So it didn't really, strike up any significant thoughts or anything. Maybe he was just sick. And so that probably just alleviated some of that anxiety for my brother and I when my aunt told us both. I think it was just a matter of time, and I'm glad that my mother told us in the most rawest form later that evening what really happened. And obviously that was just something that I would never expect, something that typically doesn't happen, I would say, especially within our family, the people around us. So it was just a very rare scenario. And I think just being a 9-year-old was really just what's going on, just a lot of confusion, I would say. But I think what made it so hard was because my dad and I were so close, and we had that bond. We were just watching some of the election coverage at that time, the night before, together. I think that's what really kind of sparked up all these internal feelings and sentiments about, okay, things are really going to be different now, but let's see if dad can get through this and go from there. Yeah, it was definitely not the easiest time, not only that day, but also the days after.
So, how did you and your family navigate those next 15 months?
Yeah, it was incredibly tough. I developed a pretty severe anxiety disorder just because I think it was not only the shock of this tragedy and what happened, but I think just not having mom around because she was, often going to the ICU or eventually the rehab center where my dad went kind of later in his years. Internally, I just needed at least mom or some sort of parent to be with me and things like that. And it was no fault of, my mom at all. She was taking care of dad in the best way she could. She was dealing with all the court proceedings about, the shooting. And thinking back, I just can't fathom the strength that she had to raise, my brother and I and get us through that period herself. And while I was in that 15-month period, it was a lot of, seeing dad in the ICU, in the rehab center, and just dealing with this anxiety disorder where I would get some panic attacks if it was like a brand new scenario that I'm in. So if I showed up at a new baseball tryout or a basketball tryout or like a music concert when I was, if I was playing in the band or something like that, I would just get very, very anxious. I would get really bad dry mouth and dry throat and just feel so uneasy, just physically,
Mm.
mentally, things like that. So it was definitely tough. But, when my father passed, we knew that he was out of pain. And based on our family faith, we just knew he was in a better place. And so that really kind of gave us comfort through that. But obviously losing dad just as dad was incredibly difficult for sure.
What was it like spending time with him at the hospital and at the rehab center?
It was a lot of kind of mixed feelings because I was so excited that I was able to see him. But the hardest part was just seeing him in that state where he wasn't able to communicate, talk, move. And that was the hardest part to see just because I wanted to do something to help him. And I really couldn't. And that was really hard to kind of grasp. And I knew my mom was trying her best to take care of him and bring me and my brother and I along. But also, I knew that she kind of wanted to not have my brother and I continuously go as much as she did to the hospital, just because she didn't want us to have that image of dad at that time and really kind of be not necessarily scarred, but negatively impacted by just seeing him in that state. But I'm just so grateful that I was able to go see him as much as I did and at least spend time with him, regardless of if he could communicate or not. That was just so special and important to me just to know that he was aware that, our family was there for him, going to be with him by his side, whatever happens. And that was really, really special for me.
I've heard kids at Dougie Center talk about when their person was dealing with a long term illness, which, in a sense, your dad wasn't really dealing with a long term illness, but a long term incapacitation in that way. They sort of adapt to it and get used to it. I say with air quotes to get used to it. And then, even though they may know that this condition could end their person's life, they're still sort of surprised by it when it does happen. They thought, well, it would just be like this. And I was curious what you remember about your sense of that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think it was just such a routine that, I can't recall if there was like a specific day, maybe like a Saturday or Sunday we would go, but it was kind of a routine where, we would just go through our as normal of a family life as possible throughout the week and then go see dad, spend time with him, and then just come back home and do it all over again. So there was that kind of normalcy and that consistency in terms of that routine. But then when he passed, obviously it was a shock because we weren't able to be, with him physically. But, as I mentioned before, that comfort that gave us in terms of, he's going to be pain free, he's not going to have to struggle, in this anymore, really gave us kind of that sense of not only comfort, but hope in terms of dad's going to be kind of what's driving our family to get closer and also get through this whole situation, however many days, years to come. So overall, it was a really, really powerful experience, within those 15 months just to see how our family would get through that. And, I just attribute all the strength, all of where my brother and I are today, everything that we've been through. to my mom just because she was the rock and, the one that kind of kept us all together and try to, give my brother and I the best childhoods as possible, just being as normal of kids as possible. And I'm just so grateful and eternally grateful for her.
You mentioned that your father was a really well-known lawyer in the Korean community and the town that you were living in. Do you have a sense of how his death impacted the larger community?
Yeah, just thinking about it a little bit more, we were very fortunate to have a lot of neighbors, family, friends, and folks to offer support during that time. Outside of that, mom was dealing with how is this going to work with the law associations, things of those changes, and more of that professional aspect. But, just the impact on the community, I knew that, he was doing something special. And, once I was able to see kind of these awards, these tributes coming in into the house, it really kind of cemented the fact that he was really doing something great for this community. And that just made me so happy, so proud of my dad, and still does today. My mother was dealing with, all of this, trying to handle everything at the same time. But she did just such an amazing job being able to work with the people who are offering support and really trying to relay that strength to my brother and I. It really kind of showed just with all the outpouring of love that we had, what my father was able to do. And I'm just so grateful of all the support, just because we wouldn't have been able to get through, that difficult time, I would say, without, all of this help coming in to the house. So yeah, very, very special to think about.
You've mentioned a number of times now, Bryan, just how basically in awe of your mom you seem to be, like so grateful for her support and her strength and her capacity. Have you had conversations with her now as an adult about what it was like for her at that time?
I have, and it's been really great. Just kind of every now and then, just reflecting back and checking in. It always just holds true that she was just doing everything she possibly could to keep our family together and help us get through this difficult time. And I always just draw out from our conversations that it was so special what she did. Everything that was going on with not only myself, my anxiety disorder, but being a kid as well, and along with my brother, and also herself, dealing with her own grief and her own, emotions and feelings. It's been really reassuring, every time we have these conversations, and it really kind of gives me a real perspective of, as I get older, I have this different sense of appreciation. Even though I was already so appreciative before, it's very different in terms of just all the ins and outs, and everything, just encapsulating the whole experience. How she was able to get our family through this. So it's been great just being able to catch up with her and kind of talk about these things all over again.
What did you, or who did you turn to for support with the anxiety that really developed after your dad was shot, and then I'm imagining continued for a number of years? Like what did you end up turning to for help around that?
Yeah, my mother was really pushing to get me to feel better, just in general. But she really wanted me to get help because she knew how deeply it was impacting my life. So we went to different counselors, different psychiatrists, just to see if, talking it out, letting out some thoughts to someone else is going to be helpful. But I think just being a young teenager, and, just being a teenager in general, I just wasn't as receptive to kind of that experience of counseling. And it was probably a lot to do with, yeah, I don't really want to talk about this as much. But, ultimately we found one specific person who was a doctor, if I recall correctly, who asked me questions in a different way, that wasn't so stringent on the professional, counseling kind of questions, but it was more just talking about my life, asking me questions that weren't just yes or no, but more just reflective in terms of, what are some of your favorite things to do? Would this give you anxiety? Things like that. So he really kind of framed things in a different way. And I think that was the breakthrough in terms of kind of having a different perspective with handling this anxiety disorder as I went through life. So And then also want to mention there was another counselor who recommended we get a little puppy just to bring back the fourth family member, in the family, bring some joy, and we ended up doing that, and our little dog was such a blessing for so long. Those are kind of the two core kind of breakthroughs and positive aspects I can recall from that help.
It seems like that doctor's ability to ask about you and your life and not just about what was wrong seemed to help bridge that connection for you as a teenager.
It did because one of the things I did was I always had to have a water bottle with me because my mouth and my throat would get so dry. And it was almost like this attachment where I literally couldn't leave the house without it. And if I did, then it would also stir up some anxiety, and some panic attack symptoms as well. So that one doctor was able to kind of talk about the things I loved. And I mentioned golf to him, and he mentioned if you were to play the nicest course for free, your dream course, but you couldn't take your water bottle, would you still go or would you not? It was a hard question to answer because I was so attached to this water bottle, but I think I ended up saying yes. That not only was a breakthrough for me, but it was the breakthrough maybe for him as well to start kind of drilling down into this detachment from this water bottle and see if that can make me more free, as a young teenager as well.
What was your dream course?
I think it was at the time, it might have been Pebble Beach in California. It's one of the more popular ones. So I think that was
Safe
it.
choice.
Yes. So that was
And near the water. There's a lot of water around it. It's not like you picked a desert course if you were going to have to give up your water bottle.
exactly. I think the doctor did a great thing. Just had to guess on the course, had a great first choice. And it was definitely positive after that. So I'm very grateful for that.
When someone dies of homicide, people can have a lot of different feelings and reactions and thoughts about the person who caused the death. What was your experience with that and your thoughts and feelings about the man who shot your father?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of hatred, early on. Just a lot of why questions about why would he do something like this, something so extreme. And that carried on definitely throughout high school. There were a lot of times where, I would just get so angry just not only at the whole situation with our family and dad being gone, but, who caused it, the person who caused all of this. And so that was very difficult at the very beginning when I was younger, and it was really dealing with those raw emotions of everything that happened. I think over time, just having this faith, in our family, just being a Christian family, I think that really kind of gave me peace in terms of just trying to have some sort of forgiveness as best as possible. And I think over the years, I always say that the experience obviously wasn't ideal, losing a core family member, but I've learned so many incredible things just from my experiences and just life in general and just how I go about life, how I, try to be my best self, not only for me, but also my family, my dad. And so it really kind of paved the way in terms of just really having this purpose in my life and how I want to portray myself, really kind of share, my love, my empathy to anyone and everyone I can. And so today it's probably a little bit less of feelings of hatred and things like that, but I'm not sure if it'll ever be, completely fine where it's 100% forgiveness towards that other lawyer who shot my father. But sense of peace is definitely there today, which is something I'm grateful for, and hopefully that can turn into, maybe a little more forgiveness down the road, and really kind of think about, these things in a different way.
Seems like the growing of that forgiveness feels really important to you and as a reflection of who you are in the world and who your father was and things that he valued as well.
Yeah, I definitely believe so. Just because, there unfortunately are so many things that happen in this world that can really impact your life, in a positive way, but, also in negative ways as well. I think just having this burden in your heart for so long that's consistent and ongoing and perpetual is can be really difficult, but also maybe kind of limit some of the growth, personal growth and mental health, growth as well. So I try to be have this mindset of as positive, optimistic as I can, and really try to share that with as many people as I can, whether it's someone I know very closely or someone I just met.
In a sense, you and your family have two grief anniversaries, the day that your father was shot and the day that he died. What's your relationship been with each of those dates over the years?
Yeah, early on, it definitely was harder, just because it was such a recent memory of having, this day trademarks 1 year since, dad passed, 2 years since dad was shot. And now just the time gap between how long how long it's been since everything happened up until now, it might feel a tiny bit more distant, but in terms of just those two key dates, I'll never forget just because, they changed the course of my life, my family's life forever. And so it is a really kind of reassuring, positive reminder, I would say today, just to know that, November 3rd, 2004 is here. This is the, 20th, 21st anniversary. And it really kind of allows me to take a step back and think about my whole experience, at that time, but also how I feel now, just being this older year. So there are definitely two dates that I feel like are just so ingrained in my heart and in my mind, and really kind of allow me to have this retrospective day of just thinking about how grateful I am for family, and how dad's living out for dad is really what's kind of driving myself and my purpose in this world. So yeah, two key dates throughout the year that are just really, constant reminders of how I got to where I be today.
Another key day that's in that mix is your birthday, since your dad died just 9 days before you were about to turn 11. What was your birthday like those first few years?
Yeah, to be honest, I can't really recall, just because I think it was still, just in that time of dealing with everything as a young kid. So, I'm sure there were sports involved, and I know a lot of neighbors and, community members, were there just to kind of help celebrate and have this, childhood birthday, as it should be, with all the fun stuff. I'm sure a lot of it was very difficult in those recent years, just because it was kind of a reminder that, my birthday is 9 days after dad passed. So it was always kind of that closeness, of those dates that probably had some sort of internal mental and emotional impact of, yeah, it's my birthday, but, it's just another year, without dad. Those were, I'm sure very conflicting in terms of the happy emotions of turning a new age, but also just dealing with this kind of anniversary date. Those years for sure, I would say, were probably great in terms of, just having that community support, the friends, family, friends, just everyone showing that love for my birthday. But also, I always knew, internally, it was a day to remember that, about a week and a half prior would be, that significant date of dad's passing. So, yeah, a little bit of both of positive, happy, and some tough emotions as well.
As the teens at Dougie Center like to say, mixed emotions about that experience.
That's right.
And then about a little over a decade later, after your father died, you end up volunteering at Camp Erin, which is a weekend-long camp for kids who are grieving. I've also been a volunteer at Camp Erin. And what was that experience like for you?
It was so special. Just a weekend I'll never forget. As I was growing older, throughout those years, I really wanted to help out more tangibly in terms of these kids and teens who have gone through or are going through something similar as me. And so that's how I came upon Camp Erin, just doing a lot of personal research about how I could really help and make an impact that way. And so I was able to be a volunteer at that camp, and they actually asked me to be the pianist for the ritual events, which was so amazing. It was just an experience I'll never forget. Not only the portions of having those, creative outlets where kids could play games, crafts, meet each other, commingle, and really kind of have that connection with some other kids who are going through, a devastating loss for themselves. But the ritual events, just seeing how these kids were, releasing all their emotions at once that might have been, pent up maybe for a little bit of time. That was incredibly difficult to see, just because I, resonated with that so closely. But I knew that they were going to feel better at the end of the camp just because they were able to have this outlet of, not only paying respects and tribute to their loved one, but really kind of getting rid of that burden that might have been, on their hearts, and on their minds, and just being and feeling a little more free and at peace. I think was something that I really got out of that camp, and it was such an amazing weekend just to be a part of, and I'm so grateful for that whole experience.
I'm picturing you trying to finish each of those piano songs as these kids are doing their various unburdening of their hearts with a lot of probably visible emotional release, and wondering, like, how did you get through each of those songs?
Yeah, you know what's funny? So my mother is a piano teacher, still is to this day, and she's been a piano teacher even before I was born. So, as I was a young kid growing up, wanted to play the piano a little bit, but my mom actually sent me to a different piano teacher because she thought that I would argue with her too much, being like, "I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that." So, but obviously got some practice help from mom whenever I needed it. Ultimately went to guitar and drums as I got older, just let out a little more energy there. But over the years and even today, I still love playing the piano. And I definitely got the gift from mom just because, if I hear a song a few times and just hear the chord progressions, I can play it back on the piano right away. And so during the ritual events, I actually didn't have any set list or anything like that. I was really just riffing for a couple hours, I think, when I didn't really think that I had that in me because I'm definitely not the best piano player, but I think just the moment of that experience and just being encapsulated with how the kids and the teens are feeling just really allowed me to amp up my ability to say, okay, this is an event and a moment that I don't want these kids to ever forget. Let's try to make it as special as possible. And I think that just allowed me to just play without break for a few hours when I've never done that in my life. And there was just something so profound about the entire moment and just, all those ritual events. And, it's something I'll never forget, as I mentioned. But yeah, it was something that was almost otherworldly in terms of just having, this ability just come out of nowhere. But it was really special for sure.
Bryan, when you started off saying, well, my mom was a piano teacher, I thought we were going in a different direction, which might have been, I heard my mom's voice in my head saying, focus, but that's not where we went.
Yeah, I ended up doing drums right after piano just because I knew I needed to hit some things and make some noise that way. So, but piano is always something I love and still love to play today.
You recently started an online community called This Is Why. What's the origin story there?
Yeah, it really comes down to, after Camp Erin, how can I more tangibly be involved? That really, I had that spark of interest before Camp Erin. Like I mentioned, I really wanted to try to help out as much as possible. But going through Camp Erin and seeing how an organization can put on an event like that to help these kids and teens really kind of pushed that interest and that passion within me. So kind of speaking to different organizations, trying to get some advice on what things I could do, what are the best ways to go about it, what are some gotchas, in this venture. I ended up starting This Is Why, a creative platform for individuals who have lost a parent as a child or teen. And I launched that on Father's Day, 2021. And that was really just kind of a milestone moment just because of the years between Camp Erin in 2019 and then 2021 was a lot of just research, trying to figure out the best way to go about this. And I thought having a written format, kind of a blog format would be a nice starter, just because it would provide a creative outlet for these individuals who have lost, a parent at a young age, really allow them to have this opportunity to share what they're feeling when maybe they did not want to do that vocally or even within their family, or really kind of share those experiences. I wanted to provide a way they could have this introspective moment and write out whatever they're feeling. And that's been incredibly special to see these stories come in and read how their experiences are so different, but so similar to mine as well in some ways. And it's just been amazing to see just this hope and the strength these individuals have, leveraging everything they went through as kind of a booster for this optimism for how they want to go about their own lives ahead. So it's just been an incredible experience so far. I know there's so much to learn, and I'm learning, new things each and every day. But it's just been so special to be a part of this grief support world in some way, shape, or form, and really try to see how I can help out, as many people as possible.
Is there anything that you've learned about grief from reading those entries that stands out as different than what you went through?
Yeah, I think the uniqueness of each story, it's very cool to see just because they have their own thoughts and their own experiences, and they have their own sort of trajectory and timeline of how things progressed, what happened before, what happened during, what happened after. I think the differences are just how some of these storytellers are sharing what they felt and, kind of formulating that in a way that really shares their experiences during, the closeness of the time when they lost their loved one. But there's also so many similarities in terms of the shock, the grief after, the whirlwind of emotions, and always just that level of, strength and hope that they always try to portray at the end of their story, which I think is so amazing because I don't have any limitations or prompts or minimum number of words, anything like that. I just want individuals to just share what they're feeling in whatever way they want to. Most, if not all, stories end with this sort of statement of hope and perseverance and optimism, which I think is so profound because I think, one, it is a tribute to, our lost loved one and how we can go about our best lives, for them, but also it's just a way that we're kind of learning how to figure out this life that we have that might get busier and busier over the years and might get, tough at some points, but, incredibly free at other points. And I think it just really formulates this image and this way of thinking and this mindset of how do I want to be? Who do I want to be as I go through this life without, my lost loved one? So it's been incredible to read these stories, over and over. And it's something that, I really love to provide that opportunity for more individuals to share as well if they so choose. But I think just that cathartic experience of writing out some of your thoughts is something that can be very beneficial in the journey as well.
As you were talking, I was reminded of something Cheryl Strayed has said. I don't know if I read it in her writing or I heard her say it in a podcast, so I might not get it exactly accurate, but she said she came to a point of realizing that a lot of the things and the ways that she was living her life at a certain age, she caught like, oh, I'm trying to honor my mom's life by destroying mine. And it was a real turning point for her to say, the best way to honor my mom's life is to honor my life and to make some changes about how I'm living and engaging in the world. And it seems like that's really where you've landed.
Absolutely. I prioritize self-care and health so much now. And I think that is the best way to maybe honor our lost loved one is that if I can be my best self, whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that is what's going to be, making my dad the most proud. It's just being who I am as an individual. And I think most of that is credited to, if not all, my mom again, just not really having such strict parameters in terms of certain things growing up, but she really just wanted my brother and I to do the best that we could in whatever we did. So whether that was school or sports, there was never like this threshold that we had to meet to make her happy. She always just said, do your best, that's all you can do. And I really live that today in terms of there's so many things that can complicate our lives in different ways. But I think just if we are able to do what we can to be our best selves, our most individualistic selves, and share that expression with others around us, I think is the best way to live our own lives, but also, to honor our lost loved ones as well.
The why of this is why is really what we get down to. So, Bryan, if listeners are wanting to come be a part of This Is Why, what's the best way for them to find you and find the community?
Yeah, so the website is thisiswhy.life. This is why has platforms all over social media, just posting some different things. And recently, this past November, actually, we have brought on a mental health coordinator and grief support expert, Kelsey, who's been amazing. And she's been a blessing to kind of bring on these new ideas that maybe I didn't have, over these years, just working with this in this venture for so long. She has been able to just bring out so many great ideas. And it's been awesome just being able to bounce ideas back and forth with her. So one of those great ideas was creating this resource intake form that we recently launched. And it's essentially a short questionnaire of talking about the loss of a specific individual, but also just the impact around that loss as well in terms of that individual's life. And the questionnaire is really set up to provide the most specific support for that person because Kelsey and I understand that, everyone's journey and experiences are unique and definitely contextual. And so we want to tailor that type of support as best as possible. And while we do want to have some more generalized support as well, sharing different organizations and what they do and things like that, we want to try to do our best to tangibly help by really kind of seeing this person's story, seeing what this person feels about his or her life at that time, right now, and really try to tailor some support that way as well. So, we just want to have the most impact that we can. And if it helps just one person, that's all that really matters. And so we try to share as much content support as possible, just so we can try to help these individuals to feel like they're not alone and that there is a community of fellow grievers that have been through a similar loss, and really try to have this sense of support and comfort, knowing that there are people helping together to create something special and really kind of be a part of a life that is satisfying and honoring, who their lost loved one is.
Well, it sounds like This Is Why and Grief Out Loud have some similar missions of helping people feel less alone in their grief. And Bryan, thank you for your time today for helping to fulfill part of that mission. And just grateful for our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Shanna. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all that you do, all that the Dougie Center does, and can't wait for what lies ahead.
And listeners, I say this to you each and every single time, but thank you for being part of the community, for helping the show mean something. It's our 10-year anniversary this year, and we'd love to hear from you. You can email me at griefoutloud@dougie.org. That's dougy.org. That's also our main website, where you can find information about our local programming, all of our downloadable resources, and of course, each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. The podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougie Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks for listening. Hope you'll join us again next time.